This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter, batch churned from single origin cream.
We've got a culturing process, a fermenting process, an aging process. So the butter will taste very different than, I guess, the average supermarket butter. I like to say we make butter makers butter. Like, this is the sort of butter makers would like to eat, simply because of the slow process in which we ferment and age and get the flavour into it. You know, the natural fermentation that gets all the flavours into the cream, and then once you churn it, you end up with this really rich, flavoursome butter that evolves and changes because it's a live culture that's in the butter as well.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
Right from when I was young, in my 20s, I've always appreciated how lucky I am to be able to head down the pier, jump on a boat, head out into the bay, and it's different every day, you know. I mean, it's just beautiful being on the water. Dad said to me, once a fisherman, always a fisherman. Well, that was the case. I mean, I just love being out on the water.
This is Fishtales, a seafood podcast. I'm John Susman. Port Phillip Bay in Victoria boasts a vibrant history of commercial fishing, particularly in the realm of scallops and mussels. Indigenous communities such as the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri tribes depended on the bay's abundant marine resources, including the scallops and mussels, for sustenance. But it wasn't until the 19th century, with the rapid European settlement and the rise of Melbourne as a bustling city, that commercial fishing really took off. Scallop fishing gained momentum during this time, employing traditional methods like hand dredging and sail-powered boats. As Melbourne's population grew, so did the demand for seafood, propelling the commercial fishing industry forward. Technological advancements in the mid-20th century, such as steam-powered vessels and mechanised dredges, revolutionised the fishing processes, leading to increased efficiency and larger-scale operations. With the industry's growth, concerns about overfishing and sustainability emerged. Fisheries management authorities implemented regulations like catch limits, seasonal closures, and licensing requirements to protect scallop stocks and maintain a balance. The industry experienced both periods of growth and decline due to factors like the overfishing, environmental changes, and the cyclic nature of scallop populations. Alongside the scallop fishing industry, the mussel farming sector had experienced significant growth in Port Phillip Bay. Mussel farming has become a thriving industry due to the bay's favourable conditions and the increasing demand for sustainable seafood. Lance Wiffen, often regarded as the grandfather of the Australian mussel industry, was a scallop fisherman who saw the opportunity in mussels early. He recognised the bay's nutrient-rich waters and ideal temperature as conducive to cultivating mussels.
My name's Lance Wiffen. I'm in the Geelong region. We've got our mussel farm at Port Arlington, which is out on the Bellarine Peninsula, and that's where I was born and bred. So I was a dairy farmer there on the peninsula. My parents were. My whole family was. They were sort of fourth generation, and then I moved into fishing and scalloping in that area. So that's where I haven't really moved far. What happened was in the 60s, the Port Phillip Bay became a new scallop sort of industry. It just sort of cranked up early 60s. And it had never happened before. So boats came from Tasmania and everywhere. And I was only a kid at the time, so I didn't know much about it, except that a lot of people were investing in it because it was a bit of a gold mine thing, gold rush fever. And my dad and uncle and his sons, they invested in little old boats and stuff, and so they did have a connection to the scallop industry. And we had, of course, many friends that were in the scallop industry because it was locally at Port Arlington there were a lot of boats. So back in those days, there were like hundreds of boats in Port Phillip Bay. But my background is the Bellarine Peninsula. When I was a kid, the road that I lived on, Church Road, it was just all dairy farms, mixed farming. So the dairy farms were 160 acres down to 80 acres. Some farms were as small as 40 acres, and people could even make a living off that. it was mixed farming, growing onions and spuds and peas, as well as milking the cows. So milking the cows was the bread and butter. That's what brought in the money to feed your family, and the other stuff was just to top it up. And if you did well, you might buy a car out of it. The area was very poor. People went to work in Geelong on buses. A lot of people didn't have cars back then. But then as I was sort of going through my school years, Dad would say, don't ever think you're going to come back on the farm, boy, because things are changing. These farms are too small. We won't be viable. And by the 70s, that became the case. Farming became unviable out there. Collins Street farmers were moving in and buying up land, and there were vineyards going up, and the whole structure of the whole sort of dynamics of the place was changing, and tourism hadn't really taken off much then, but there were sort of hints of it. There were talks of it, but the things just didn't really move. I went to school, went off to uni, and I wasn't much good at uni. I was doing echo and legal studies, and cripes, I'd be looking out the window thinking, geez, it's a good day. I wish I was out hay carting. I reckon we could make a few bucks out of that. So I was probably never going to make it as an academic. And then I came home, and one summer when I said to Dad, why don't we buy a scull boat? Like, I didn't have any money, of course, and the industry had really flattened out. It had been dead for quite a few years, but they were just starting to catch a few, and there were a few boats for sale for not much money. And Dad said, okay. So we went halves. He paid all the money, and I paid him back. Probably within 6 months, I paid back my half. Anyway, I became a scull fisherman and loved it, and went on to build new boats and buy another boat, and we had 2 boats and licenses to go everywhere. And then we started fighting the anglers and other sort of residents of Victoria, and started fighting politicians. No one really wanted big commercial operations in Port Phillip Bay, and Melbourne surrounds Port Phillip Bay, so all the constituents were quite happy to vote Sculpies out of the bay. So it was a very it was a very popular thing for Jeff Kennett to do, to ban scallop fishing. So I could see it was early 90s that he banned us. So I'd been scalloping all those years up until then. And I loved it, it was a great lot. And we were trying to rationalise the industry. It was difficult. It was run by 2/3 Greek and 1/3 sort of Caucasian Aussies, and the two groups we used to fight a bit, but we were sort of coming to agreement that we needed to get the boat numbers right down, and we were working with Jeff Coleman. He was minister at the time. And we're working with him to rationalise the industry, and they were guaranteeing that it would continue. So I went out and bought another licence, and I wanted to be a part of this new industry that was only going to have a few boats in it. And then I was coming back from a tennis holiday on a long weekend. It was the Grand Prix, the first Grand Prix, and Jeff Kennett stood up at the Grand Prix and said, "I'm banning scallop fishing from Port Phillip Bay." So that was the end of it. So then he passed legislation so we couldn't sue for we couldn't sue for compensation. And that took 2 years, so we were able to still fish for another 2 years, and then we were gone. And he paid us out on the license that I bought at that time that we were going to rationalise. That's what all the licenses were bought out. So our boats and our lifetime of work, everything was just wound up at that time.
Land farming and sea farming are interconnected sectors that play vital roles in food production and sustainability. Land farming involves growing crops and raising livestock, while sea farming focuses on cultivating aquatic species. Both sectors require responsible resource management and sustainable practices to minimise environmental impact. Gaining an intimate understanding for the marine environment through careers in both land farming and wild catch fishing provided a unique opportunity for Lance.
What happened was, there was a small mussel industry in the bay. They used to dredge for mussels and send them to Sydney, and the people in Sydney would wash them and grade them and cook them up and put them in jars. I don't know what, but it was quite a small. There was only a couple of boats that did it. And the trouble is, the mussel beds were inside 10 metres, and scallop fishing was only allowed outside 10 metres, so we didn't touch the grass beds. But mussel harvesting did touch the grass beds, so they banned it. And when they banned it, the fisheries offered water in Port Phillip Bay to do aquaculture, which none of us had really heard of. So anyway, they copied the New Zealand methods of doing it and introduced that to people, and about 20 people took up 3-hectare leases in Port Phillip Bay in various spots and had a crack at this, copying the New Zealand thing. Well, most of it failed because we had so much to learn about the actual water we were growing it in. And I didn't start then. I started a couple of years later. I bought one of the guys out that went in. So the people that took it up were people that had been diving on rigs and stuff and were retiring, and there were a few of them, and one was an eel farmer. And, people had no idea of really how Port Phillip Bay operated and how rough it was, and so most of that stuff just turned into a big mess. And that's when I bought in. And I bought in just to keep my guys working over the summer period when we weren't scalloping. And then when scalloping was banned, I started putting more effort into the mussels. And then as things went wrong, I had to invest more money because I'd say, I can fix that if I do this. And before long, I was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, on a business that really wasn't making anything. I was just doing that to try to make it work. And like my first purchase was, I bought the lease for $20,000, and then all of a sudden I had a look on the books and I'd spent a couple of $100,000. How did that happen? So the farm I bought was all broken down. So they had these plastic buoys that would get a crack in them and leak, so they filled them with foam. Then what would happen is they'd fill with water, and then you couldn't get the water out because it'd stay in there with the foam. And they weighed a ton, and I had to get all that stuff out of there. So anyway, then I had a guy that was an ex-scallop fisherman as well, and he was the fussiest guy in the world. He was a family friend, and he'd had a crack at the mussel foaming but never made it work. But he instructed me on how he thought was the best way to actually grow the mussels. Now, other guys were using all sorts of methods. So imagine a fish bin, and you cut the front of it out, then you put a hole in the bottom of the fish bin, then you tip a heap of mussels in, and then you push the mussels into that hole, and then you have a rope running in from above, and then you've got sock on the bottom. And it was just all this sort of cottage industry stuff. And then he introduced a stainless steel funnel to me, and he said, you need to use this, and you have someone above you that pours it. So actually that method that he taught me to put the mussels on the rope, we still use today. So I still grow, 25% of our crop we still grow on ropes, and we still do it by hand, that cottage industry way. The New Zealand method of continuous ropes and twin long lines and stuff like that, we just copied it right to the T when they first started. And the first big blow that came in, the whole lot twisted up in a knot, and then we just didn't have the right gear. We didn't have the right expertise, really. We were shown what to do, but Port Phillip Bay was quite different. So we gradually, so this guy, Bruce Bushell, he actually, even the gear we put on, the anchors, the big concrete blocks, the chains we used, all that gear we put out actually worked. So from his help really got me started, but it was all the things that happened after that became the issue.
For a farmer, the disappointment of producing an unsaleable first crop highlights the risks and uncertainties involved in farming. It serves as a learning experience for farmers who may need to reassess their production techniques, improve their understanding of environmental factors, and implement more robust disease management and post-harvest practices.
In 1987, I had my first crop, and I reckon I probably had, close to 100 tonne that I would have sold. And we lost the whole crop. We sent them to Paul Jensen, and he took the first load, and he called me up and he said, these taste bitter. And I said, oh, look, I don't even eat mussels. What do you mean they taste bitter? And anyway, we tasted them, and oh man, you couldn't eat these things. And then we're actually coming back. We were scallop fishing at the time, and the bloody scallops started tasting bitter. And then the fisheries looked into it, and we had this Rhizostlenia bitter taste algae bloom in the bay. Hadn't been seen anywhere else in the world, and our mussels were bitter. So then we went through the next 6 months tasting mussels. And we lost that whole crop. I dropped it on and just started again. And other people tried to hang on to the crop by resocking and all this sort of stuff. And that algal bloom that we had, we've never seen anything like that again. But we did see a couple of times one similar to that. So what I did, I couldn't afford to have those sort of losses. So I went to Western Port Bay and started growing mussels there. So I got to the stage there where we were growing half our crop at Flinders, and they were magnificent mussels. They'd only fatten. It was very oceanic, and when I say oceanic, coastal, and there'd be good ocean swell that would come in on the farm, which was tedious to work. And I reckon I nearly drowned twice there, but it was just a different place to work, really strong currents, a lot of ocean swell, and I just kept expanding there, and because the mussels were just so good. And then all of a sudden their gear started to break down. And in the end I had a full-time dive team, 3 guys, that were working on the farm every day, charging me an absolute fortune, and I could not keep the stuff from breaking. So in the end I sold out of that. I sold that farm off. And then they introduced new water in Port Phillip Bay, which is what we call Pinner's Channel, and that's where I've got 3 27-hectare sites now, out in deep water, right out in the middle of the bay, which behaves differently to the other sites. But that bitter taste algal bloom, even though we have seen little remnants of it, it's never come back like it did those first couple of times. And that was back when we did have scallop fishing going on. And it was also back when Werribee used to release more water into Port Phillip Bay. So I think we had a tendency to get more blooms. And I think the scallop fishing contributed to it as also with because we also had a situation where there was a channel dredging at one stage, and the channel dredging in the Geelong arm, where Clifton Springs farms are, we had a bit of taste algal bloom there that year as well. So I think it's just, mobilising the cysts on the bottom of the bay, and by disturbing the bottom you create more nutrients, and those sort of things affect you. So we had to deal with that. That was a big one to deal with.
The pride felt by a farmer upon making their first sale is a celebration of their hard work, the value they bring to their community, and the deep connection they have with their crop. It marks the beginning of a rewarding journey and fuels their determination to succeed in the ever-changing and challenging world of farming, whether on the land or the sea.
My first market was to 3 kilos to Le Président in Geelong. I drove all the way from Port Arlington into Geelong and delivered a bucket of mussels to Jean Paul at Le Président, and I just didn't know how to get this thing started, how to market our mussels, and we could not sell a mussel in Victoria. That was really slow going. I was supplying a couple of guys in Melbourne that they went broke. I mean, we went through that period of time when the government removed the lunch dinners. They brought in fringe benefits tax. The fringe benefits tax, not the that just wholesalers dropped over. So anyone that was sort of running along on the edge of life, they went down. So the couple of guys that were starting to buy mussels off me, they failed then. But what actually happened for me, one of my scallop processor in Melbourne, who I dealt with for donkey's years, was taking a couple of bins of mussels off me a couple of times a week, and he said they're just not interested in them. He said they come along, run their hands through them, and they go no, and they were buying chill-killed green-lipped mussels. I don't know if you remember, they used to bring them in these little green boxes, and every stall up in the Melbourne market would have a pallet of these sitting out the front of and that's what everyone was using. So they're actually selling mussels, but just not ours. So I went home and then I put our mussels into polystyrene boxes and brought them up to Dallas. And then a couple other wholesalers that I didn't know, they came up to me and said, oh, look, we've got some inquiries about those boxes. A couple of other people want to try them. So just by simply putting it in a polystyrene box was enough to get it started. But then what happened to me was it started to really bounce hard, like it was really starting to move. And I had a guy called Jason Jury who was starting to buy a pallet at a time, and I'm talking about a big pallet. And then he's buying 2 pallets. And then other people were buying big numbers. And then I found out that they were rocking up to Sydney and going in opposition to my main market, which was Paul Jensen. So then I had the dilemma. I was actually competing against my market. And what happened is Paul Jensen ended up going broke. So we lost our main buyer in Sydney, but by that stage I had Poulos Brothers and all these other guys starting to take our mussels direct. So that's how things changed. It was just simply putting them in a polystyrene box.
The changes in the mussel farming industry in Port Phillip Bay over the past 30 years reflect the sector's commitment to innovation, sustainability, and meeting the evolving demands of consumers. By embracing new technologies, adopting best practice, ensuring product quality and prioritising environmental stewardship, the industry has positioned itself for continued growth and success in the future.
We had about 20 farmers at Port Arlington, a lot of smaller farmers, and they would come online just for a small period of time in the year, but it would cause a massive headache in the marketplace. So I started selling other people's mussels, and we were by far the biggest operator in the country, and until we got to around year 2000 when we peaked, and then all of a sudden we found it difficult to get our natural spat for. We just weren't getting enough, and we're struggling to fill our farms. And the smaller guys, it was worse because we had so much gear in the water. Because our farms were much bigger, we could scrape mussels off our long lines and barrels and that sort of thing and get enough to put in a commercial crop, even though it wasn't as big. So the smaller guys, they just had to stop. Like, they just weren't getting enough in the water. So anyway, things weren't improving. So that's when we built the hatchery. And there were several of us got involved in that and finished up with 3 of us being involved in it. And that took a couple of years to get up going. But that ended up, in the end, we got our commercial crops back again, and we got full, and we've been expanding, and now we've got massive amounts of spat in the bay again. So in the year 2000, there were about 20 farmers in the bay, and there were 17 at Port Arlington, and now there's 3 at Port Arlington. So that's how times have changed.
Industry aggregation in aquaculture brings numerous benefits and opportunities. By fostering knowledge sharing, expanding markets, influencing policies, developing infrastructure, mitigating risks and building capacity, participants can collectively drive growth, innovation and sustainability in the sector. Through collaboration and a unified approach, an industry can unlock new opportunities and tackle challenges more effectively, positioning itself for long-term success. The relationship between Tasmanian Spring Bay mussels and Lance's sea bounty business is a standout example of this strategy.
I felt like I was flatlining for quite a long while. Costs were going up, and I've got to go back a little bit because Spring Bay came into the mussel farming roughly the time we started having problems with the spat, and Phil pretty well took over all the markets that we had in Sydney. So Poulos Brothers and those guys that we supplied in Sydney all of a sudden became Phil's customers. And then what Phil did is he turned up the heat a bit by introducing, thermoforming packaging and stuff. And, back when we were supplying Poulos, we were supplying loose mussels. All of a sudden, he's putting out packs that the mussels are a bit better cleaned, and because these mussels were beautiful there, and they were debearded, and oh my God, So all of a sudden, when we started coming back online, Poulos said, well, we want them this way. So they were taking some mussels off us, but nowhere as many as they used to. And then, of course, Pug and the boys started up over in Port Lincoln, and then they came in with the same sort of packaging. So now what was happening is we were getting squeezed more and more away from our traditional markets, which were right up the eastern seaboard, Melbourne, and then right through to, Sydney, right up through Queensland. We were losing those markets to the Pug and Spring Bay, and we were locked into Melbourne. And then what that did is I was competing with my other local guys here that could just throw, 20 bins on the back of a ute and run them around Melbourne and keep the price at it pretty low. And that's what I found then for the next several years is what I was doing was I had to hang on to Melbourne because I was struggling interstate to fight these other big guys. And then when I was in Melbourne, I was competing against anybody that grew mussels in Port Phillip Bay that could easily just go to the market, in their own vehicle and keep the prices low. So when Phil had started to have problems down there with an algal bloom, that's when him and I started. We'd been talking before that. Like we felt that the bigger companies in Australia should come together and see how we could help each other do a better job of marketing. Anyway, Phil came to me and said, could I help him out when he had problems down there? So he would come across, start packing my mussels in that modern form of thermoforming and doing a better job of my product and market them. And then I would help him out with supplying his markets when he was having problems. And of course, Phil's a fantastic business person, and I was very keen to join up with him, and I trusted him absolutely. I mean, the moment I handed over my factory to him, and he went out and built a new one, he was bound to me because he needed mussels, but I was more bound to him because if he all of a sudden rolled over, I was finished because my factory was shut down, and I would have had it. So I had to really trust him, and I do, of course. And he's a fantastic business person. So I'm really happy to be working with Phil.
Pivoting from a mussel farming business to a tourism business opens up new avenues for revenue, branding, and market positioning. By leveraging the existing assets, developing unique experiences, and contributing to the local community, the business can tap into growing tourism and create a sustainable and diversified operation. This pivot offers benefits such as increased revenue, brand recognition, economic impact, educational opportunities, and long-term resilience.
When we really struggled here, marketing-wise, we're always looking for ways to sell more mussels, and Melbourne sort of it grew on itself. Like the restaurant game, they were so big in promoting mussels. Like they would do a Master Chef, and when the ad had come on the telly, it'd be a plate of mussels they were cooking up. Like those guys were doing so much for our industry. and what we would do is we would invite them down to come out on our boats and see how we do it. And then we had guys like, Ben Shuri and Matt Moran from up your way, and we've had lots of, some people from overseas, like Rennie and Rachel Koo and people like that, and they would come out on the boat and they would say, "This is fantastic. You need to show other people what you're doing out here." And so we always intended on doing it. Mum said she was reading a book the other day just on our local area, sort of one of these history book things. And this guy wrote in about 2005, and he must have interviewed me at the time. And I must have said to him that Lizzie and I were wanting to do a tour boat back then. I didn't realise that we were thinking about it that far back. But, we were taking journalists out, sometimes politicians, all sorts of people, but it was always illegal to take them out on our workboat. Illegal in that we were only supposed to have people that are trained workers on board. You know what that's like. And we're always taking a risk, and the journalists would say to us, "Oh no, you need to take people out and show them this. This would work as a tourist thing." So we actually always had it in our mind. But I've got my son Shane. My eldest son Shane, he works for the business, and he's 30 odd years old now, and he's been working with. He went to uni as well, and I mucked him up because I allowed him to work on the holidays, and then he never left either. So I sort of he's a mussel farmer through and through, and he's running the show now, and that makes it so much easier for me to be able to do what I'm doing here with Lizzie. I probably couldn't have done it. If we're running the business the way we were. But now that Phil's managing all the marketing side of it, and Shane's really doing a great job of managing the farm side of it, they only need me occasionally to help out. So it's giving us, Lizzie and me, time to do this tourism thing. Like I say, it's something we wanted to do. The thing is, when we've had people out there like MasterChef and stuff, sometimes they've brought down big mobs. We've had 20, 30 people on board. And I could tell when we had that, it didn't work. And when I've been out there with just half a dozen people, or a small mob, it did work. People seemed to get a lot out of it. So we decided to get a boat that we could take out. We've set this one up to take out 12 so that we can go out, lift the lines up in comfort, and then people can sit down, they can be around the decks, they can be anywhere they like on the boat. And we've got a beautiful galley to then harvest the mussels, cook them up, and then Lizzie shows them a couple of recipes on how to do it. And we're able to also talk about the health benefits of what mussel does to the environment, as well as how good the product is. And those things are so important for us now. The political move with social media and all media, really, things can just move that quick these days. And if we need to have politicians and we need to have the public, we need to have everybody on side thinking and knowing that mussel farming is a good industry to have, and it's something that we want to keep, because you just never know what's around the corner. Some dodgy politician, not dodgy even, but just some politician that all of a sudden sees a benefit in banning commercial operations in Port Phillip Bay or something like that, and all of a sudden they could do this just to win one election, and you could be gone. So we need people to embrace what we're doing and really get to see all aspects of our operation, right down to our water sampling, all our it's a beautiful organic product. It's you can't have anything more natural and healthy to eat than shellfish out of a beautiful environment.
Living your entire life in a region you love fosters a strong sense of pride, belonging and connection. It allows you to appreciate the region's natural beauty, actively engage with the community, develop expertise and contribute to its preservation and sustainability. This lifelong commitment and deep connection to the region evoke a profound sense of pride in your role as a custodian, advocate, and contributor to the rich heritage and future prosperity.
I'm in the place that I grew up in, and a lot of people find that boring, but I just love the area that I live in. I love Point Arlington, I love the Bellarine Hills, and right from when I was a scallop fisherman, right from when I was young, in my 20s, I've always appreciated how lucky I am to be able to head down the pier, jump on a boat, head out into the bay, and it's different every day, you know. I mean, it's just beautiful being on the water. Dad said to me, once a fisherman, always a fisherman. Well, that was the case. I mean, I just love being out on the water. Not when it's rough, not when things are going wrong, but the rest of the time I absolutely love it. So I'm just blessed to be able to go to work every day in the place that I absolutely love. You know, if I was retired, I'd still rather be doing what I'm doing, you know.
Lance Wiffen's role as a champion for the Victorian seafood industry is characterised by his commitment to sustainable practices, emphasis on quality, collaborative approach, market promotion and contribution to the region's economy. His leadership and advocacy have elevated the industry's profile, enhanced its reputation and positioned Victorian seafood, particularly his beloved blue mussels, as a sought-after product in both domestic and international markets. This is Fishtales, a seafood podcast. A Deep in the Weeds production. I'm John Susman. Follow us on Instagram at Fishtales Seafood Podcast or email us at fishtalespodcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay tuned for more tales from beneath the surface of the seafood world every Friday on your podcast app.